Just once, so welcome.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Sorry I'm a little late coming in. You'll forgive me? It's great to see everyone. Y'all sitting in a different place. I don't know what to do.
They are. Oh, wait a minute. They are.
Yeah. Welcome back to Pat Spikes, who's been away and been ill. And I'm looking around the room to see what other strangers have wandered in here. I think everyone else has been here in touch lately. Oh, Bob Haney's joining us this morning. Welcome, Bob. But they're in the back of the room as well. I want to begin with a thank you. Thank you again to all of you who participated in the Christmas gift that was so generously given to me on behalf of the class. Overwhelming. Wow. I want to report to you how we've used part of that gift of cash.
Well, in a card form.
We had card form. Allison's Christmas present for me was a trip that we took this week, a quick trip to Chicago to go see the musical Hamilton. Which is everything it's cracked up to be, by the way. Really, really spectacular. And
Here before long?
next year. Yeah, next year. Yeah. So Chicago's the second place that it was. So it was the first outpost of it. Really remarkable show. And so you gave some spending money for that excursion as well. Thank you for that. It was my first outing really since my injury and made it, so that's good indeed. All right, let's see. I'm trying to think if there's any other announcement I need to make.
Well, before you get totally off of that, have you watched Hamilton's America on Channel 13?
Now, is that the show about the show?
Yes.
Yes, it's spectacular.
Yeah. Well, it's on again tomorrow night at 9.
Yeah, really.
For anybody that hasn't, it's fabulous.
Spaghetti luncheon. I mean, we're gonna have someone talk to the class next week, I believe.
Oh,
Just
good.
kind of
Okay. Very, very
pre-plug
good.
spaghetti luncheon for the youth.
Next week is the Super Bowl.
Youth part. Next week is Super Bowl. Karen, hope you stay for that. Always fun. Good soup. Good soup. Yeah. And very important way to fund our World Hunger Offering. Yeah. Any other announcements I'm forgetting along the way? Did everyone get a handout today? Anyone need a handout?
No, is it the same?
We're not giving hands up today. We're giving hands out.
Is this the same? Is this a different handout?
It's a different. I'm going to have a different handout every week. I know this is really revolutionary for our class. It's taxing everything
Are you
about
responsible
me.
for these kids?
I am.
Oh, you're.
I am. Yeah, this is.
Wait a minute.
Yes,
Wait a minute. You got one. There you go. Thank you.
The rate I'm doing.
Anyone else need it? Oh, we got donuts over here. Oh, okay. Quick announcement. Chad has 2 tickets available to the SMU men's basketball game this afternoon at what, 2 o'clock? 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock?
Yes, you can go ahead and lunch and then go.
Anyone interested in going to the SMU men's basketball game?
We just came.
Oh,
Free tickets right here.
There you go. No strings.
Anyone on live stream?
What day is it, Mark?
Today. Okay, I'm gonna put it right. If you think about it during the lesson. You thinking about it. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the one parable, just one, but with some strings attached to it. So the parable we're going to talk about today is the light under a bushel. Now, remember all those 2 weeks of preparation we did about what is a parable? That's going to be important today because you could argue that this really isn't a parable. You could. So, just for example, if you look at the way this is reported in Matthew, which is the first reading on your sheet, Jesus begins by saying, "You're the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored?" Right? And this doesn't get counted as a parable by most accounts. It's more of an analogy, right?
Why do you have it on here?
For context. Because remember, a
Context.
text without context is only a pretext.
That's right, it's only a pretext, yeah.
All right? But when you get in Matthew to verse 14, "You are the light of the world," is that really a parable? It's more of an analogy or metaphor too, right? So think, as we're talking about this, in the different iterations, this sort of skirts the line of parable and not parable. In the broad definition, remember there's a big tent definition of parable that includes metaphors and analogies as well. All right, so that's where we fall on this. This parable appears 4 times in the Gospels, but in only 3 Gospels. It appears twice in Luke's Gospel, which is unusual. It's in chapter 8 and it's in chapter 11. So Luke records Jesus telling the story more than once, which is not crazy because clearly Jesus had a repertoire of parables and illustrations that he used, and it seems likely he told them over and over and over again, probably in different contexts. What's interesting in this case is to look at these 4 appearances and see how they get tucked into slightly different places. And if you look at the whole chapter that these reflect from, you would see even more difference on this. In one case, they are attached as sort of a precursor to the Sermon on the Mount. So just different in that. So what I'd like us to do today is we're not going to read aloud all 4 of these. You can read those individually. What I'd like to, again, remember that Mark was the first gospel written and is the primary source, typically, for things that are then repeated in other gospels, or they shared another source. So would someone volunteer to read for us the passage from Mark chapter 4? Who'd be our reader today? All right, Mike.
Starting with 13.
Mark chapter 4, 21 through 25.
Yeah.
It's right there on the sheet.
Okay.
It's easy.
Yeah, that's too easy. He said to them, "Is a lamp brought in to be put under the bushel basket or under the bed, and not on the lampstand? For there is nothing hidden except to be disclosed, nor is anything secret except come to light. Let everyone with ears to hear listen." And he said to them, "Pay attention to what you hear. The measure you give will be the measure you get, and still more will be given to you. For those who have more will be given, and from those who have nothing, even that what they have will be taken away."
Okay, there's Mark. I've changed my mind on this. We need to hear Matthew because it's so different.
I got this.
All right. You want to read Matthew to us?
Where am I?
It's on the back of your sheet. It's on the back of your sheet.
Hold on.
That's all right.
She's going to read from the special Bible.
Yeah, I am. Where is it in the back of the sheet?
Matthew 5, 13 through,
14 and
actually,
15? Oh my gosh.
13 through 16.
I told you I haven't had any sleep. Okay,
All right.
5, 13 through
16.
16. Okay. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Or how am I going? How long?
Through 16.
Oh, the whole thing. Okay. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. Sorry, baby. But on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven.
All right, notice the significant difference in the way that this same illustration or parable is reported or used in Matthew and in Mark. And then Luke uses it even differently. We'll get to that in just a moment as well. So first of all, I want to start by a very practical question or comment, and that is describe me what a lamp is in this time. A lamp in the first century is not an electric light, obviously, nor is it a Coleman lantern that you may have camped with before, right?
Kerosene?
Well, not even kerosene.
Not even kerosene.
Oil.
It's olive oil. It's most likely olive oil, and typically these were small dishes. I should have brought a picture to show you. Well, I don't dare go into that cabinet, do I? All
I
right.
wouldn't do that.
Imagine a small dish the size of my hand that's sort of cupped like this, and it has a reservoir on one end, and it comes up to a point, like my fingers are coming up on the other side, that's sort of where it's pinched together, typically to hold a wick. So that wick is held in there and goes down into the bowl where the olive oil is. And so they also don't have matches,
No, that's right.
right? So they've got to rub something together still to create friction to light the lamp. And typically, in the entryway of a Jewish home in the first century, you would have a lamp that's burning constantly to light the way for people coming into the home. And so this is the context in which Jesus uses this illustration. Everyone would know what he's talking about with a lamp. And as we talked about last week, to say that you would hide your lamp under a bushel, which is not like a bushel basket to put corn in that we know, the word changed over time. It's really a bowl. A bushel is a bowl. So what Jesus is saying is absurd, because no one would do that. You wouldn't hide your entryway light underneath a bowl and make the room dark. Nobody would do it. So it's ridiculous. This is a ridiculous statement that Jesus is giving. And as a result, welcome, by the way. I just realized you're first time with this too, right? Maybe second time. In a while. Yeah, I'm sorry. Back to our previously scheduled lesson. I didn't mean to miss you earlier. Some lamps actually had covers, but they covered the reservoir, not the wick, right? So the whole notion of this is to say something that's so absurd that it makes a point, right? As with last week's lesson as well. Now, before we go on, does that make sense? Anyone have a question about what a lamp was? Or maybe some of you who've traveled have actually seen these lamps, because a lot of them have been found at excavations.
I have a statement, not a question.
Yes.
Another reason you couldn't cover it is because the wick that is in there, it burns. So you have to gradually increase it so you'll have to burn it. So if you cover it, then you won't have the ability to extend the wick for it to continue burning. The light would eventually go out.
The light would eventually, oxygen. Indeed, yes.
Aaron Cole Carr, last week, or for the past 3 weeks, has done the little program on Bones Come Alive.
Yes.
Okay, he had one of the little lamps that he had gotten from
Oh,
over
cool.
there. And he burned it each night. And then he had a little thing on the wall that he showed pictures of. And so we sat in the dark just with that little lamp, and it really added a lot to the
Wow.
thing. Yeah.
So how much light did it put out?
Well, it had a little help from the hall.
Okay.
Mark?
Yes.
They didn't have Anderson windows.
That's right.
Probably a little bitty hole.
Little bitty holes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this has been described as putting out about the equivalent of a 40-watt bulb for us. So imagine a closed room with only small windows with a 40-watt bulb.
That's my mom's house.
She said that's her mom's house. Yeah.
Oh.
All right, let's look at Matthew. I'm going to sort of walk through the version of Matthew, Mark, and then Luke, and we'll get this together then. In Matthew, we're given a set of 3 metaphors together: salt, light, city. The salt, the light, and the city. You see that you're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. What's the connection between them? Why does Jesus connect these 3 things in Matthew's account? What ties them together? Anyone?
Basic elements that everybody would be familiar with.
I'm sorry?
The basic elements of the people's lives that they would be familiar with.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't-
Yeah.
Good question.
What about things they're familiar with, like they know salt? They
They-
know it as like a city. on a
It's
hill.
very,
They
very
know-
basic,
Yeah.
right? Very,
Paints
very
an easy
basic.
picture.
So let me help you out just a little bit. The language here, the construction of the Greek, these are emphatic statements, and they are plural. The you doesn't have to be written the way it is, but it is written in a very inclusive way. You all. In Texas, we'd say,
So that's
y'all.
the first you all say.
This is the origin of y'all, right here, in Greek. Y'all are the salt of the earth, and y'all are the light of the world. You are a city built on a hill that cannot be hidden. Now, think about the context of this. Jesus is the rebel teacher who is stirring things up, and he's saying to the people who are listening to him, you all are light, and you all are salt. You cannot be hidden. And yet, in other places, Jesus tells his disciples not to tell anyone what he's doing. So, why is Jesus so bold here, and how do we understand that in contrast to the points where he says, tell no one this, right? And yet here he's saying, go be the light on the hillside. What's up? Good answer, anyone?
There's some back and forth in the Gospels, is Jesus the King of the Jews? So perhaps he's saying, let's don't rock the authorities as far as, because it's not time yet. Let's don't rock the authorities and do this the kingdom, and we're taking power, but it's more of the Beatitudes: be kind, be good, be that light.
I think you're exactly right, Helen. This is really a call to be exemplary, to be someone that people would imitate, right? To be light in this case, and to be salt, is not to be just an agitator, but to be a force for good, to be a positive force, to bring enlightenment to those around you, light, enlightenment, and so forth. The light theme is so prevalent in big chunks of the New Testament. You can find it all. John, in his gospel, says of Jesus, the true light that gives light to all people was coming into the world. He was the life. John, in chapter 1, connects light and life in that. And other places you can find examples of light being used in the New Testament as well. All right, so I gotta get my notes here again.
Mark,
Yes.
I understand the light analogy. It's real easy because, light illuminates everything. But I was sitting here thinking about, why did he choose salt And I understand that salt is flavoring for foods too, but did they use salt in those days too to preserve meats
So
and
it's
things?
preservative and a
Yeah,
flavor.
okay,
Right,
yeah.
yeah. This was,
Is there also used to heal like wounds or not in that?
yeah, multi-purpose salt, right?
Is it essential to life?
Well, yeah, I mean, salt is also essential. I mean, if you don't have enough sodium in your body, you're gonna be really whacked out.
Which I would think life would be essential to life too.
Yeah, salt is an essential element for life, yeah.
I think too, something that I've never thought about it until it's here in front of me, but like you wouldn't use, he's speaking, like you said, plurally. You wouldn't use 1 grain of salt. If you're lighting the world, you wouldn't have one light. It would be inclusive. If you're doing a city, it wouldn't be 1 brick. It would be a collective.
Yeah, it's a collective thing. It takes everyone together on this, yeah. I wonder if Jesus knew about pink Himalayan sea salt. Garrett's introduced us to that, yeah. All right, here's a quote from a commentator I read that's pretty good. The readers of Matthew, the original hearers, and those of us who read it, are not challenged to try harder to be salt and light, but are told that as followers of Jesus, they are salt and light for the world. The text calls us not to more self-exertion, but to believe Jesus' word and to accept and live out the new reality it has already created in the call to discipleship. Well, this is an interesting point. This is a you are. This is not a statement, go out and work to become. See the difference? You are. You already are the salt of the earth. You already are the light of the world. Make good use of it. Right? Make good use of it. Yes?
I was listening to NPR this morning when I dressed, and of all people to say something inspirational, RuPaul was being interviewed.
Yes.
And he's apparently a fairly religious fellow. And he said something that really struck me, because you talk about inclusive. He said, we are all God in drag.
Wow.
Okay.
I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, meaning in disguise, right? In costume, right? Yeah, I think that's what the Bible teaches, that we in some sense are we're representatives of God in our own clothing and skin, right? Yeah, that's part of what it means to be light. So you get the point, this is not optional. This doesn't require extra work on your part. It just requires living into what you already are and what you already have. And when you don't, you hide your light under a bowl. That's the meaning here. Now, the other thing to say is that sometimes, and I've got another quote in here, I'll come to in a moment, sometimes we cannot be exemplifying light, but think we are. We can be full of darkness and think we're full of light.
And we all think that at one time or another.
At one time or another.
Some
right?
think it more often than others.
Some is more true than others. Yeah. All right. I mentioned earlier this contradiction. In Matthew 6, 1 through 18, there's a long story in there that you'll recall about where Jesus says, don't do your works of piety before others. And yet here he says, go be a light. Which is it? Well, one, I think, is the state of who you are, and the other is who you brag about being. Different thing, all right? Light doesn't light itself any more than salt makes itself salty. Think about that. Light doesn't light itself any more than salt makes itself salty. We have been made salt and light by God. So in these metaphors, we cannot understand religion as something personal and private that we get to hide. And how often do we run into people and say, well, you know, I'm a very private person about my faith. This contradicts that idea. We must see the public witness of living for Christ. The teachings here call us to look beyond ourselves, We have been made salt and light by God. And in these metaphors, we cannot understand religion as something that is only personal and private. We must see the public witness of living for Christ. These teachings call us to come out of our shell, move beyond our comfort zone, and be a witness for Christ in the world. Thoughts on that? Anyone want to take that on? Chad, please.
I think that too, that what they're saying here is assisting others. Where, a lot of people say that, my religion is you go out and like you almost have to defend Jesus or something. Or it's like your job is to figure out why people can't come in. Or you can't help them because of X, Y, and Z. And all of these are, he says that your job is to go out and help other people. And really that's it.
Yeah. The
pious thing that you're supposed to do by yourself is this relationship between you and God, is up there.
Right.
But everything else, as long as it's assisting people, not filtering out people, it's supposed to be.
Go be. Go be is really what this is about. Live your life in such a way that you are shining light to those around you just because of who you are.
But not burning down.
Don't set them on fire. Yeah, no torching along the way. Yes, David?
And I think in Matthew, the end result is that people will give glory to God.
Right, excellent point. And this leads right into the next point I want to make, and that is the backstory to all this is that Israel, the Jewish people, had been called by God to be light to the world. This is throughout the Old Testament. The mandate, the purpose they'd been given was to be God's people, to reflect God's glory to the world, right? And we've talked about this before. What Jesus is saying here is you need to be the light that you've been called to be already. It can be applied to Christians today, but its original meaning was a challenge to Jesus' own contemporaries who had made it more and more difficult to be light to the world because they were so focused on themselves and their own internal rules and regulations, right? It would be wrong to take this as an anti-Jewish statement. Jesus is not anti-Jew. Jesus is a Jew, right? He's anti-misinterpretation of the mandate that they had been given, right? Tom Wright, here's my Tom Wright quote. God had called Israel to be the salt of the earth, but Israel was behaving like everyone else with its power politics, its factional squabbles, its militant revolutions. How could God keep the world from going bad, the main function of salt in the ancient world, preservation, if Israel, his chosen salt, had lost its distinctive taste? In the same way, God called Israel to be the light of the world, Isaiah 42 as an example. Israel was the people through whom God intended to shine his bright light into the world's dark corners, not simply to show up evil, but to enable people who were blundering around in the dark to find their way. Good context, I think. The danger here, again, is if those of us who are called to be light instead become darkness. This city set on a hill is supposed to be a beacon of hope to the world. You get that. What Jesus was saying was revolutionary. And he exemplified it himself. Jesus says, what? I am the light of the world. Right? And when he says to us, you are light, you are salt, it's the mandate that's transferred from Jesus' own self to us. To be Christ-like in this way is to be light. What do you think about that? What Jesus is, we are to become, or we are to be. Is that helpful? Scary? Scary? Yeah. All right. Anything else on the Matthew text before we quickly move to Mark? And his treatment of it? Yes, Kathy.
I was just thinking about, when someone is baptized here,
Yes.
George always, it says, you are the salt of the earth, and he puts
Yeah.
on their tongue, and you are the light of the world, and he gives them a candle. And that is part of, after they are baptized,
And it's drawn right from here.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Excellent point. Okay, in the Mark passage, there's a bit of a different context. I've got I believe, wow, I've got this completely mixed up here. We talked about that. Okay, one thing is, Mark's construction is a bit different. Matthew and Luke talk about lighting a lamp and then placing it or not placing it under a cover. Mark's version uses a little bit different language, and it talks about a lamp coming into or being brought somewhere in order to be put under a cover. Do you see the difference there? Is a lamp brought in to be put under a bushel basket? It says. No. Now, the next curious thing about Mark is the connection that begins in verse 22, for there is nothing hidden except to be disclosed, nor is anything secret except to come to light. Now, if you were raised in a good fundamentalist home like me, this verse and others like it were used to scare you into right living. Because the teaching is that anything bad you do is eventually going to be made public for all of eternity to know. Anyone else raised that way? Yeah. Well, now let's think about the logic of that for just a minute. I know eternity is a long, long time. But if every person who's ever lived in all of creation has all of their every thought and action exposed, that's going to take more than an eternity, I think. And plus, it's going to get boring pretty quick.
How about being desensitized?
Very repetitive.
And a lot of, yeah, like I've seen this movie before. Because there's nothing new under the sun, right? That's not what this means right here. Be scared if you want to, and there are other places we've talked about that, but that's not really what this is talking about here. Jesus is talking more about his mission and his mandate that has been disclosed but is being made known, and the way it's going to be made known after he's gone, that the disciples all don't understand yet, but this is written after they do understand it. The way it's going to be known is through those of us who are light and salt, right? That is how it is disclosed in this case. The teachings of Jesus that have been secret are carried on by those of us who are the light. Let anyone with ears to hear listen to this, he says. Okay, does that make sense? Now, it's really curious to me that Mark then pairs this with this saying about, with the measure you give is the measure you will get, and still more will be given to you. What in the world does that have to do with the light under a bushel? Can anyone come up with an answer?
Mark, is he saying that the more you are the light and the more you do spread the word of God, the more good will come back and the more good will come to the world, and that those that don't give anything and you do nothing, they're going to be judged therefore?
Well, I think you're onto something. I mean, light begets light, and darkness begets darkness. Right? Do you think that's true? Not always. Sometimes darkness succeeds for a while, but not ultimately, right? Not ultimately. It's a curious pairing here.
It feels a little like prosperity gospel. I mean, I know that's not what it's
Yeah.
supposed to be, but basically that's how it sounds good. It's saying if you have some, you're going to get a lot more, and if you don't, you're not going to get any more. I mean,
Well, this is a passage that's been misused and abused by the prosperity gospel preachers, right? Horribly abused.
After they've scared you.
After they've scared you, then all your secret deeds are going to come to light. All right? Yeah, and verse 25 is pretty harsh. Those who have nothing, even what they have, will be taken away. There's another parable we'll come to later that explores that theme more, so I'm not going to get down in the ditch on that one right now. So let's save that one if we could. Let's look at what Luke has to say about this. Again, which is a little bit different than the other two. Look in, well, we have the same things about being disclosed, right? Well, he elaborates on ways you can hide a light. Under a jar, under a bed, under a lampstand. This Dr. Seuss could make a good one out of this. I would not hide it under a jar. I would not hide it under a bed. Would not hide it under a lampstand. Yeah. Look at verse 18. Then pay attention to how you listen, for to those who have, more will be given, and from those who do not have, even what they seem to have will be taken away. So that's picking up the same thing from Mark, but it's adding that little introduction. Pay attention to how you listen. What does that mean?
Isn't that being humble?
Yeah, I think humility requires you to listen, right? Because arrogance, pride, typically prevents you from listening and understanding. That's a good way to look at it, I think.
Who's he saying you're listening to in that?
Well, what he says is pay attention to how you listen.
But to whom?
To whom? I think is implied there. Yeah.
Well, your mind can get on other things, sitting here, we should be listening to you, but you could be saying, well, now after this, I have to go here and I have to do that. That's not listening.
Thank you, Paul. You should be listening. Yeah, that's good.
Explain to me at the bottom in Luke, it says, those who have more will be given, and from those who not have, even what they seem to have will be taken away.
That's hard to understand.
Yes,
Yeah, that's a hard one.
it is. Seemed to.
Yeah. I'm actually going to punt on that one and save it for when we get to the parable that deals with that more extensively.
Okay.
If you'll let me take a pass on
Well,
it.
you're sure we'll get to it?
I'm sure we'll get there. Maybe next year, but we'll get there. Yeah. There's only 40-some of these, so we ought to be fine. Yeah. Okay. We talked about the vestibule, we talked about the, okay. All right. Another commentator I read said of this chapter 8 passage, those who have made a right response to the Word of God are to be light for those who enter the household of God. So thinking about, again, this light in the vestibule of a home, as you enter, it's always burning. The comparison here that Luke is making is that those who become a light for God welcome people into the family of faith. The perseverance of those who are already disciples will illumine the way of new converts, this commentator says. So the light is to help other people find the way as well. I like that. Scan Luke's gospel from the beginning to the end. this commentator says, and you will discover that the characters who hear the word of God and obey are often outsiders in one way or another who have no illusion that the darkness in them is light. Okay, stop and think about this. Those who are seekers are less likely to be full of darkness and claim that it's light. They know they have darkness. It is typically those of us who think we are enlightened who actually have hidden our light under a bushel and don't know that we have, or act like we haven't. That's challenging, I think. Yeah. So look at the comparison between the way Luke tells the story in chapter 8 and the way he tells the story in chapter 11. Chapter 11, he's talking about judgment, really. I had a question from another teacher in our system here this week asking about when Jesus refers to this generation, as he does in Luke 11:29, what does that mean? Why does Jesus, there are multiple times in the Gospels that Jesus talks about this generation, blah, blah, blah. And really, we sort of talked about this a bit in a different way last week when we talked about old and new. So this generation is Jesus' shorthand way of saying the present age, the old way of living. This generation, the old way is an evil way, he says. It asks for a sign, but no sign will be given except the sign of Jonah. So Jesus is talking here in response to the Pharisees who are asking Jesus to give them a sign that he really is the Messiah. And Jesus says, because you're an evil people, there will be no sign given to you, except for the sign of Jonah. Well, what is the sign of Jonah?
Repent, for your damnation is near.
There's the testimony of Jonah, yes, which is being in the fish. It's a reference to the story, right, that everyone would know at this point. And the Queen of the South, I have no idea who that is.
Yeah, I'm wondering.
Yeah, I have no idea who that
It
is.
is definitely not this stupid.
It is a TV series.
Yes.
Fun fact, Wilshire's old work van appeared in an episode of Queen of the South. Yeah.
Wilshire's what?
Our old van, one of our old vans, they had taken the old logo off, but the shadow of it remained, and it was used in one of these episodes of Queen of the South. It's out there somewhere. One of our old Wilshire vans.
No, what's Queen of the South?
It's a TV show.
Yeah.
It's a TV
Trust
show.
me, it's nothing you want to watch.
All right. What Luke, what Jesus is saying, Luke, is that these other people who had an opportunity to repent and did, they're going to come back and judge you, right?
I can't hear you.
If you don't listen to this, right? They will rise up at the judgment and condemn you because they repented at the proclamation of Jonah. And someone greater than Jonah is here. Me, Jesus says, right? And right after that, he goes on to say, no one after lighting a lamp puts it in a cellar, but on the lampstand so that those who enter may see the light. So Jesus is the light of the world here. Don't hide Jesus, I think is the message here. And then verse 34 gets all the more curious.
Yes.
Your eye is the lamp of your body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. But if it is not healthy, your body is full of darkness. Well, now, that makes sense because if you can't see, you're in the dark. Right? So the ceiling light in our garage went out yesterday. And I've not gotten the ladder out yet to go change the light bulb.
Perhaps you shouldn't.
Perhaps.
Yes. Yes. Please don't.
I think I can do it on step stool.
Let Jared do it.
So if you open the door, our garage, unless you're willing to open the garage door, it is it's pitch dark in there, right? So I have to take a flashlight with me into the garage now to go get anything out of the garage if I'm not dressed or willing to open the garage door back there, right? And I know it's dark. I know it's dark, right? I'm not claiming that it's full of light, right? The point Jesus is getting here to is when you don't have a receptacle to receive light, you're going to be in the darkness with this. So, verse 35, consider whether the light in you is not darkness. If then your whole body is full of light, with no part of it in darkness, it will be as full of light as when a lamp gives you light with its rays. This has a connection also to 1 John and references to light.
Because I was thinking the mirror too. Like it says, for now you look into a mirror dimly, but then it's like basically when the light's there, you'll be able to see. That mirror will be clear.
Yeah. And I think Jesus is in a way holding up a mirror to the religious folks around him in this day, saying, you think you're full of light, but you're actually full of darkness. Right? And this is a challenging thought to us as well, out of this parable. Are we really light to the world? Or do we just think we're light to the world? You can think you're a lighthouse, but you're not a lighthouse. Right? And this is one of the huge challenges I think we face in the Christian faith is to get so ensconced in religion that we think we're putting out light when we really aren't. It's like, have you ever known a person who thinks they're funny but they're not? They think they're hysterical, but they're really boring and dull. Right? I mean, their jokes are bad. Right? But they think they're very, very funny. And who has the courage to say, you're not so funny? Right? Who has the courage among us to say, you're not as full of light as you used to be?
Well, we don't particularly like saying that and
Yeah.
making that judgment. I'm not even sure that it's always ours to make.
So here's the point. No one's going to tell you this, so you've got to be self-aware. And this is about taking a hard look at yourself regularly. And I think this is partly what prayer is about as well. If we listen, if we don't just talk to God, right? Who has an experience that would help us with this? Yes.
Well, we've all been in churches before that there were people that were there every time the church door opened, but they didn't take it any further than the interior of the church.
Right. Yeah, that's a good
Just
example.
because they were there for every service they weren't spreading any light.
Yeah, just because you hang out in a garage doesn't mean you're a car. I heard someone once say. I really did hear someone say that once. Just because you hang out in a church doesn't mean you're a Christian. Woo! Yeah.
Mark,
Yes, Terrell?
verse 35 sounds like an oxymoron to me. It says, therefore consider whether the light in you is not darkness. If it's light in you, how can it be darkness?
Well, the point is, what you think is light in you.
Oh.
Yeah, the implication is what you think is light, right? I may think I'm all sorts of things. I mean, I may act like I have a full head of hair and I don't. I can carry a comb around and pretend to comb it. Right? Yeah. I think it would be dangerous. Absolutely. All right, so what do we take out of this parable at the end of the day? What's the lesson of this parable?
Have to think about it.
So, someone summarize it for us.
We want to be light.
Be light. Be present. Be shining.
And maybe we wanna add a little flavor to the world. I
There
mean,
you go.
A little
Good,
excitement
Caroline.
about what we do,
Add some excitement, Carol Ann says.
maybe.
Yeah. Okay, I hope that you'll remember most of all, this is not something you have to work at. It's something you have to be. Be yourself. Be who God made you. Be light. It takes work to cover up the light.
Don't get blind.
Don't blind yourself if you're blind. Yeah.
And to that point, I've been taking copious notes.
Oh,
Yes,
my.
I think,
Because I think that's gonna be the theme, I know it's gonna be the theme of our women's retreat.
Oh, right.
Later in the month. I mean, the title is, Finding You. And I can see everything that we talked about today in this parable is what it's all about.
Cool.
And I may include we're all God in drag, just.
That's a good line, isn't it?
Yeah.
Good line.
Just to
Okay.
get everybody's attention.
So
Yeah.
next,
Get it.
if you're keeping score at home, next week we're gonna pick up number 4 on the list, the wise and foolish builders. We may get number 5 too. We'll see, but we'll definitely deal with the wise and foolish builders. That's a pretty good one as well. All right. Thank you, live stream folks. Goodbye. We'll move now to our prayer.